Uma serra magnífica, um castelo altaneiro, uma cidade em crescimento, uma praia selvagem, um mar em todo o seu esplendor e um tesouro para descobrir. Viajamos porque queremos partir à descoberta, viver novas experiências, contactar outras realidades. Viajamos para compreender o desconhecido, o estranho, o que é diverso. E nessa viagem vamos ao encontro de nós próprios. Venha connosco e mergulhe numa viagem com 5 sentidos. O castelo, no cimo do Monte Sobranceiro à cidade, acolhe os visitantes como testemunha da sua memória histórica, tendo sido edificado no século XII pelo mestre templário Gualdim Pais. Aqui encontra também a cafetaria do castelo, um espaço moderno e agradável com uma vista privilegiada sobre a cidade. Eis uma cidade com 900 anos, onde um pedaço da história se encontra ao virar de cada esquina. A figura tutelar de Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo, Marquês de Pombal, ilustre estadista português do século XVIII, responsável pela reconstrução de Lisboa após o terremoto de 1755, está bem presente na cidade. Descubra o museu que exibe um valioso espólio dedicado à sua vida e obra. Visite igualmente o Museu de Arte Popular Portuguesa, com um importante acervo representativo das mais diversas e tradicionais artes populares portuguesas. No património religioso, destaque para a Igreja do Cardal em estilo barroco, a Igreja de São Martinho, a Igreja do Carmo e para o monumental Convento das Clarissas no Louriçal. Beneficiando da sua localização estratégica, a 1 hora de distância de Lisboa e do Porto, com várias infraestruturas rodoviárias e ferroviárias, os parques industriais do concelho acolhem inúmeras empresas, operando em diferentes setores que potenciam a economia local e nacional. Descubra a gastronomia local que reflete a geografia do seu território, com influências culinárias baseadas em produtos de excelência e num conhecimento assente em tradições seculares, fortemente enraizadas na população. A noite oferece vários pontos de passagem, onde encontra ambientes calmos e descontraídos. Eventos culturais e música ao vivo marcam os ritmos noturnos e dão a conhecer outras sonoridades. A Praia do Osso da Baleia, praia dourada com um extenso areal, é um dos poucos redutos naturais na Península Ibérica que permanece no seu estado selvagem, livre de construção urbana. Além da bandeira azul, ostenta ainda o galardão Praia Acessível, por estar dotada de infraestruturas para pessoas com mobilidade condicionada. Mergulhe numa experiência sensorial ao percorrer o trilho da Baleia Verde, explorando a biodiversidade florestal existente junto à praia, os seus tapetes de líquenes, os samocos e a vegetação dunar. A natureza inspiradora da Mata Nacional do Urso, uma das maiores manchas naturais da região centro, irá transportá-lo para outra dimensão. Aqui, poderá embrenhar-se no trilho da Lagoa de São José, onde se destacam vários tipos de vegetação. Num vasto território, que se estende do mar à serra, encontra uma paisagem onde o rural se alia ao urbano em perfeita comunhão. Na Serra de Sicó, magnífico exemplo de paisagem cárcica da região, destacam-se as capacidades ímpares para a prática de desportos de natureza, sendo o Canhão do Vale do Poio um dos locais naturais mais procurados para a prática de escalada. Por toda a serra se exibe uma flora intensa e variada, onde as orquídeas selvagens revelam toda a sua beleza e raridade. A vastidão da serra é de cortar a respiração e eleva-nos o espírito. O teu coração bate por Pombal.
Então, sejam muito bem-vindos a Pombal. Aliás, este vídeo promocional visa precisamente convidar as pessoas a visitarem Pombal e a conhecerem o nosso território, e agradecer esta oportunidade por intermédio da SIGA e do nosso amigo Emanuel Medeiros, enquanto responsável maior, podermos por esta parceria também dar a conhecer Pombal ao mundo inteiro, e por isso fica este convite para conhecerem as mais-valias que nós temos no nosso território e as experiências que temos para oferecer a quem nos quiser visitar. Eu queria destacar nesta abertura, de uma forma sintética, mas com impacto naquilo que é a parceria que hoje estabelecemos entre o município de Pombal e a SIGA. A SIGA, que é representada pelo Emanuel Medeiros, é a instituição que lidera a nível internacional a promoção da transparência e da integridade no desporto. Isso para nós é muito importante, porque daquilo que nós temos como experiência, não tenho dúvidas nenhumas que o desporto tem que ser assumido como uma escola de valores. E por isso é que estão aqui hoje representantes de várias áreas de ação do município e do município em parceria com instituições locais, relacionadas com a educação, com o desporto, juventude e novas tecnologias. E estas 4 áreas são 4 áreas que influenciam o futuro das novas gerações. Não tenho dúvidas nenhumas que o desporto assume, e frisei isso na minha intervenção hoje de manhã no Salão Nobre dos Passos do Conselho, o desporto assume um papel relevantíssimo, quer no fomento da coesão social, onde todos são iguais, mas também, sobretudo, no desenvolvimento de competências que os nossos crianças e jovens têm para enfrentar os desafios da vida. Não tenho dúvidas nenhumas que a prática desportiva faz com que os jovens adquiram competências de assiduidade, de espírito de equipa, solidariedade, entreajuda, de entrega, de saberem que têm objetivos para cumprir e que têm que trabalhar para alcançar esses objetivos. E o desporto é, acima de tudo, uma escola de valores. E a SIGA é a instituição que, a nível internacional, mais defende essa prática e, por isso, o município de Pombal associa-se a este objetivo de assumir o desporto verdadeiramente como uma escola de valores e também trabalhar nos nossos programas. Nós temos vários programas, quer ao nível da educação, quer ao nível da juventude e também ao nível daquilo que há de ser as novas tecnologias, para assumir realmente o desporto como uma escola de valores. E hoje temos esta oportunidade, ou durante esta conferência, de falar numa componente do desporto que vai assumindo cada vez mais importância e que nós também temos que ter uma adaptação. Temos que ter uma abordagem, e eu acho que temos uma abordagem positiva aos desportos eletrónicos. Nós temos neste momento também uma parceria com a Federação Europeia dos Desportos Eletrónicos, e quero cumprimentar o Rui Jesus enquanto responsável maior dessa instituição, e temos que também ajudar as crianças e os jovens e as suas famílias nesta relação que têm com os desportos eletrónicos e com o gaming e tudo aquilo que é hoje a panóplia de jogos digitais que estão ao dispor dos nossos jovens. E tudo aquilo que sejam ajudas que possamos nestas conferências, nestas iniciativas de reflexão sobre esta temática, competências que nós possamos ajudar a desenvolver nos nossos jovens e também de quem cuida dos nossos jovens, nos professores, nos educadores, em todas as pessoas, nos nossos técnicos especializados, nas pessoas que se relacionam com essas crianças e jovens. E por isso nós queríamos dizer que em Pombal, para além da nossa localização estratégica e daquilo que são as nossas condições para desenvolver iniciativas nas mais variadas áreas, assumimos os esportes eletrónicos também como algo que nós queremos ter como estratégico também para o desenvolvimento do Conselho, de atração de investimento, novas iniciativas, novos eventos, para também ajudar as pessoas a enfrentar aquilo que são os desafios que hoje as novas tecnologias assumem, e nós não podemos ser indiferentes àquilo que são os desafios que as novas tecnologias assumem hoje também no desenvolvimento das sociedades, e estarmos também a liderar esse processo, e eu creio que a SIGA também assume aqui este papel de nos ajudar nessa estratégia, e queremos também, nós temos neste momento a desenvolver aqui um trabalho muito importante ao nível do empreendedorismo jovem. Vamos ter brevemente aqui uma incubadora de empresas no nosso território. Estamos altamente entusiasmados nesta temática do empreendedorismo, de assumir também aqui Pombal como um sítio propício ao desenvolvimento de startups, nomeadamente de inovação tecnológica, e dentro desta área, a área do gaming assume realmente aqui também um papel especial que nós queremos naturalmente também assumir também aqui como um desafio, e por isso agradecer-vos, já me estou a esticar um bocado, mas agradecer-vos mais uma vez esta parceria que nós temos com a SIGA e também a nossa disponibilidade, reforçar isso, a nossa disponibilidade para trabalharmos em conjunto e para acolhermos iniciativas que valorizem o trabalho da SIGA e que tenham impacto na vida de cada uma das crianças e jovens do nosso território, porque é para elas trabalhamos, nós trabalhamos para as pessoas e não temos dúvidas nenhumas que aquilo que nós possamos fazer para que essas pessoas tenham mais recursos, mais competências, mais capacidade para lidar com estes novos desafios, é um trabalho profícuo, interessante e que tem impacto na vida das pessoas, e por isso agradecer mais uma vez e passar aqui a palavra ao Emanuel, agradecendo mais uma vez aqui a disponibilidade e esta relação que vamos ter para o futuro, que eu tenho a certeza que vai ser muito profícuo. Obrigado.
Senhor Presidente da Câmara Municipal de Pombal, meu caro amigo Pedro Pimpão, na pessoa de Vossa Excelência, cumprimento todos os presentes. E cumprimento de forma calorosa, com um sentido sublinhado e genuíno de privilégio por estar aqui, nesta terra. Uma terra que me acolheu como filho adotivo há 32 anos, foi amor à primeira vista, quando aqui me vi pela primeira vez, e eu que sou um homem de afetos, nunca esqueço as primeiras emoções. E por isso estar aqui em Pombal, sobretudo numa ocasião tão importante como esta que estamos a vivenciar, que começou com a formalização de um compromisso solene, consciente, deliberado, de promover os mais elevados padrões de integridade, de governança, de transparência no desporto, para que o desporto possa exercer a sua função indeclinável, insubstituível, inestimável na sociedade contemporânea, na economia dos dias de hoje, ajudando também a cada um de nós a sentir-se pessoal e profissionalmente realizado, trabalhando e usufruindo de um setor de cabeça erguida, honrado, do qual não temos que nos envergonhar, mas pelo contrário temos que nos orgulhar. Essa é uma tarefa que implica todos nós. Ninguém está isento, ninguém está excluído, todos estamos convocados para que este setor, que não é apenas um setor de paixões, de entretenimento, de atividades lúdicas, mas é sim um setor de trabalho, de investimento, de progresso, de criação de riqueza, de solidariedade, este setor possa de facto cumprir o seu papel. E se necessidade havia, depois de termos ultrapassado esta fase traumática, dolorosa, profunda, que deixa marcas invisíveis, psicológicas, profundas em cada um de nós, e a que ninguém escapou ileso, o desporto ganha um papel ainda de maior relevância. E, portanto, todos nós temos que dar um contributo muito importante para que se instale, para que se cimente, para que ganhe raízes e se alastre esta cultura de integridade. No fundo, de cumprir as regras, de cumprir as leis, de respeito pelos próximos, de respeito pela dignidade da pessoa humana. E é por isso que para nós, na visão que nós temos do desporto, sem integridade nada faz sentido. O desporto sem integridade não é desporto, é uma vergonha. E portanto o nosso combate, a nossa militância, o nosso trabalho, o nosso labor, o nosso sacrifício é para que, à escala mundial, o desporto possa se alcandorar a esse patamar cimeiro e possa estar onde deve estar, que é no pódio. E por isso agradeço à Câmara Municipal, na pessoa do seu Presidente, da sua variação, a oportunidade que nos dá em trabalhar neste Conselho. Um Conselho onde se sente, vive e respira progresso. Um Conselho onde se sente, vive e respira ambição. A ambição, como disse o Pedro, de servir as pessoas, de estar em contato com as coletividades, com o tecido empresarial, mas também com os jovens. Porque os jovens é que terão a responsabilidade falta-me o nome em português, mas isso é construir o futuro. Aí diz a shape, mas é a mesma coisa. E, portanto, é um momento muito importante para nós, do ponto de vista afetivo, para as relações que nos unem a Pombal, mas também do ponto de vista daquilo que são os desígnios de estratégias da SIGA, de estar próximo das pessoas, próximo das organizações e procurar contribuir para este apuro civilizacional de que o desporto também faz parte. E com isto também quero fazer uma referência especial ao papel que as autarquias locais desempenham. As autarquias locais estão na primeira linha do combate. São o elemento mais próximo das populações. Melhor percebem os problemas, os anseios, as necessidades, as aspirações, as legítimas aspirações da população. E eu sei o quão difícil e exigente é ser autarca. Porque ser autarca não é estar sentado numa cadeira de pregos amarelos, simbolizando um poder inacessível, com quem não se tem contacto. Não, ser autarca é estar 24 horas disponível para atender os munícipes, para ouvir as suas preocupações, para responder às reais necessidades das pessoas. E, portanto, eu tiro o papel ao trabalho que é aqui feito pelos autarcas deste Conselho, porque sei o quão importante e também o quão exigente é o desempenho desta missão. E agora, se me permitem, falando em inglês, and addressing in particular a word of heartfelt welcome to our foreign guests who honor us with their presence. I would like also to say that today is a very special day, not only because it's day 5 of the Sport Integrity Week, a Sport Integrity Week that has been crowned by success and achievements and enthusiasm and celebrations all over the world, but because it is for us Women's Day. Every Wednesday, especially the first Wednesday of every month, we have a series of initiatives designed to encourage female leadership, designed to empower female leaders, designed to pave the way, encourage, stimulate women of all ages, of all social backgrounds, to take a front seat, to take the lead, because sport makes no sense without gender equity, without racial balance, without the values that we defend to our society. They must be at the forefront of sport. So to all women in this room, I take my hat off and salute for the great work that you are doing in sport. And I see many athletes, many women involved in sport. Katie is here. She's at your disposal. She will mobilize you to the forefront of the battlefield. But also for the contribution that you will be giving from now on. We need you fully armed, fully equipped, ready to engage, because you have an immense power, and that power must be exerted as an example to the younger generations, so that they know, so that they can be certain, so that they can be confident that they have a place in this industry too. E já agora convido também para quem se quiser juntar a nós, vamos ter no Porto, hoje à noite, um SIGA Dinner Debate para se tratar precisamente destas questões, que são questões importantes. E, naturalmente, que aqui a questão do Esports também tem lugar. Mas permitam-me uma palavra específica a algo que me despertou ao ver o vídeo. E perante a evocação do nome do Marquês de Pombal, a ligação que tem com esta terra, mas também aquilo que ele simbolizou de liderança, de assunção corajosa, de ação, de dinamismo, de tenacidade, num período tão difícil, tão traumático como foi o terremoto que destruiu Lisboa em 1755. And when I refer to the earthquake that destroyed 90% of Lisbon in the 18th century, in 1755, I cannot avoid remembering a speech that I delivered in New York City on maybe the 2nd of November 2015, when SIGA was nothing but an idea planted in my brain and already contaminating a few others. I evoked Pombal because there was a clear comparison between what was happening in world sport with the so-called FIFA Gate and all the investigations that widespread across all sports and covering every sport, every nation, every sector of activity, showing that no one was immune and every sector was vulnerable. Vulnerable to corruption, vulnerable to money laundering, vulnerable to criminal infiltration, and victim of poor governance, poor regulations, lack of oversight, lack of scrutiny, and this lax attitude, which was dominant and still is dominant in so many governments, who prefer to turn a blind eye to the problems, dig a hole, put them in, as we could just simply ignore the problems. No. That was not what Pombal did. Immediately after the destruction, Pombal rolled up his sleeves and said, bury the dead, take care of the wound. Let's rebuild Lisbon. And this was the attitude that took us, SIGA, in those days, when sport was devastated by this plague of unscrupulous individuals and illicit behaviors, and also confronted with widespread investigations and suspicions. We said, we have to take a step forward. We have to take our responsibilities. We will not decline our role. And that is why we have a united front, an independent, neutral, multi-stakeholder front that stops at nothing, that does not ask permission, that does not ask for favors, and that is solely focused in advancing the highest governance and integrity standards across the industry. So the comparison and the similarities are indisputable there. E nós precisamos dessa atitude mais do que nunca. Sobretudo no momento em que fomos atingidos por esta crise pandémica, que nos atingiu de forma tão profunda, nós precisamos, de facto, deste assunto de liderança. E, portanto, a nossa presença aqui, Pedro, é também, do ponto de vista simbólico, um momento marcante e que, de certeza, nos vai inspirar, não só a quem já faz parte da comunidade da SIGA, mas aos outros que hão de vir, e são todos bem-vindos, a encarar as adversidades e transformá-las em oportunidades de sucesso. E, de resto, é isso que nos move. O sucesso no desporto em geral, o sucesso, em particular, no Esports, procurando fazer com que o desporto seja não apenas um fator de entretenimento para quem o pratica, mas que possa, de facto, ser um catalisador de desenvolvimento social, de desenvolvimento económico, ajudando, por exemplo, num conselho como este, a reforçar o seu papel no mapa, a dar perspectivas de futuro aos jovens, a atrair o escolo das novas gerações, cada vez mais viradas para a tecnologia, para a inovação, para a sustentabilidade, e aqui, num ambiente propício, num ambiente saudável, num ambiente que estimula, que encoraja e que apoia, facilitado pela Câmara Municipal, não tenho a mínima dúvida que em 2024, quando aqui nos voltarmos a reunir, iremos ter não apenas o dobro das pessoas e das organizações envolvidas, mas teremos o dobro do entusiasmo, da participação, da ambição e, com isso, deixaremos uma marca mais funda. É esse o nosso compromisso, é estar convosco, é trabalhar, é avançar, prestando um tributo por tudo o muito e importante que aqui está a ser feito, agradecendo a confiança e a oportunidade. Bem-ajam.
Hello? Can you hear me now? Is it working? We have tech issues. We have tech issues on an Esports Integrity Forum. Is it working now? Okay. So, welcome again. My name is Nuno Prestrelo. I am the Director of Comms and Media of the Sport Integrity Global Alliance. I welcome you to the first ever Esports Integrity Forum, which is hosted by Pombal Municipality and WESCO Europe. We will now start with a presentation by Sandra Lopez, a senior tech exec, former Microsoft and Intel, yes. And after this, we will have a session on esports integrity and development. Sandra Lopez will be participating in this session. So will Rui Jesus, Vice President WESCO Europe, Reinaldo Ferreira, Vice President of Boa Vista Football Club, a big Portuguese football club. We will have from Morocco, hello Morocco, and Khalid Naili, Project Manager, Moroccan Games and Sports Association. We will also go to England with Mags Byrne, founder of the eStars, the home of educational esports, and to Switzerland to meet the Human Rights Officer of the Swiss Sports Federation, Tsubasa Shinohara. I hope I said it well. Welcome, everyone. Sandra, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Perfect. A little bit closer. Well, I'll start off with buon tarde. I think I got it pretty good. Okay. I first want to say it is such an honor to be here, and thank you, Pombal, for your hospitality. Not only is this a very beautiful city, I've been amazed by the beautiful people, the beautiful culture, the food, and watching the video, just thinking about the amazing history. I also want to thank SIGA, Emmanuel and Katie, for their focus on integrity and ethics. I think it has to be the center of our conversation in the sports industry. And also, I always talk about, as a woman, I see a couple of females here, the importance of having advocates and sponsors for you in any industry. And so it is such a great honor to be alongside two fine gentlemen that I could say, I just met you guys recently, but could be sponsors, and as well as Emmanuel in terms of an active sponsor for making sure that there is equality for all, not only females, males, inclusive of those that we now call by the pronoun theys. I thought it was interesting in the video that it started off with a history and talked a lot about Pombal. And oftentimes I find in the sports industry that esports is talked about as something new. And being in the tech industry and having been raised in Silicon Valley, so I'm in the heart of Silicon Valley, born and raised there. My entire career, over 20 years, has been in Silicon Valley. To take you back a little bit to understand the history of esports, because oftentimes you need to understand where we've been and where we're going. So hopefully we can pull up the slides. See? Okay, perfect. So how many of you have realized, and I know we have people joining us in live streaming, but think about this. Oftentimes when we talk about esports, it's talked about that it's fairly new. In reality, it's been with us for over 60 years. I want to give you a couple of highlights because this is important to understand the overall evolution. In 1947, the very first game was ever created around gaming and the active video. And then understanding the creation of technology and creating instruction sets, language that could talk from point A to point B, multiplayer, which was tennis, the ability for two players to actually interact with each other, and that was basically, throwing the ball forward and backwards. But where it started to get really interesting was in the 1960s, where it wasn't just about tennis or tic-tac-toe. It was about taking, a spaceship and being able to direct it in overall space. And that's when, oftentimes in the tech industry, we start to talk about, that's when esports really began. And then you started to capture the notion of twin galaxies and capturing scores and starting to be competitive with each other. And that in itself started to require in the 80s what we call computational power, which I will share with you a little bit as many of you decide to actually pursue careers in engineering and gaming to understand what's required to run these experiences. Then in the 90s, in the 80s, we had over 10,000 players. That requires computational power to be able to interact with more than 2 individuals. You had the Nintendo World Champion in the United States, and if you go back, it's all on YouTube, being able to watch these young kids compete with each other. Then, the world first tour of esports began, basically taking the world of sports outside of the United States, internationally around the world. And where it started to get really exciting for some of you, which I see in the crowd, who are Twitch users. Any of you are Twitch users? No? The ability to stream allows the ability to interact with various individuals at a global scale. The ability for fans to talk to the players at the same time. And that really revolutionized the overall game of esports. And then what happened, think about in 2020. This big debate of whether or not is esports a sport? Is it? And there's lots of debate, but that's where the Olympics actually recognized the evolution of esport becoming an actual sport and competition. But all of this, what had to happen in order for all this to transpire? There are 2 main drivers that we will say in the world of Silicon Valley that drives the evolution of esports. One is technology advancement, and the other one that was significant is the fact that many of you were born in the digital world and were more accepting of technology. It was much more acceptable. And while I can spend some time talking about digital and the digital natives, I really want to spend some time bringing the tech industry with you and helping you understand and appreciate what has to happen underneath everything. Who has heard of performance per watt? Performance per watt. In order to run a video game, you need to have computational power to render, encode, and deliver. So you have to have chips that perform at a very, very, very high rate to drive the frames per second. What happens when you drive chips at a very high rate, right? High performance requires battery. And if you're playing a game, oftentimes you're not playing for more than an hour, you're playing more than 2 hours, and in some cases there's individuals that find themselves inside a room for over 8 to 10 hours. So the science behind delivering performance without affecting the battery became critical. This is where I was at Intel. The whole science between performance per watt was something that we were actually focusing on. The balance of having the CPU and GPU talk to each other. Let's say you figure that out, right? That is a hardware level. What happens with regards to network connectivity? You want 99.9999% uptime. In reality, you probably want 100% uptime. Because if the system and the game slows down, what will happen to that one player that's actually playing for a prize? He, she, or they may lose, right? So the network connectivity and what transpired there was you needed this high speed, you needed the fiber optics, and you needed all of this to work with software and hardware, okay? So think about what's happening inside the devices, what's happening in terms of connectivity. You needed to make sure 100% uptime, 0 latency, and then, in what devices were you going to put this in, right? It began with gaming consoles, but then putting everything into a desktop and managing the connectivity performance per watt, connection with the Ethernet, and you've got the desktop figured out. So this was like in the early 90s, early 2000s. What happened with mobile connectivity? These laptops didn't just happen. You know, the chips were actually, you have to think about the size of the chips that need to be included. And so then you think about all the different devices that gaming comes into play. At Microsoft, they taught me the greatest gift of all. What happens when somebody wants to play a game and they don't have a hand? How do you play? How do you drive inclusivity? We talk about Sports Integrity Global Alliance and ethics and inclusivity, thinking about not only gender, but thinking about those that have disability. So Microsoft was one of the first companies that introduced ability to use joysticks without hands. And that in itself became transformational. All of this happened, and where are we going tomorrow? Who's familiar with the cloud? Okay. Cloud computing is going to democratize access to gaming. To buy a hardware device with a high GPU, CPU, so that you can run these games at a very low latency costs significant amount of money. In the US, in the United States, US dollars, over $5,000. What does that mean for somebody that is economically challenged? You may not have accessibility to that. So cloud computing is going to democratize and have access and drive scale. Cloud computing is going to allow people to talk to each other at a global level. It will allow gamers to update the software real time and deliver it. When you have everything on a cloud and everything's going into one singular data center, we're going to save the world. Why is that? Remember in the past, we all have our gaming devices. You have your desktop, you have your laptop, you have your gaming consoles. All have hardware inside. Imagine bringing everything to the cloud, and you now have a more efficient infrastructure. That matters, especially as you think about Pombal creating the esports tournament, the role of the cloud and how you can actually save the environment. Then you have access to all this data and analytics and being smarter and more effective in terms of how you deliver the games. And 5G connectivity, we're all kind of getting up to speed, and as you build out these e-tournaments, you got to think about 6G connectivity. This is all about delivering speed real time around the world with zero latency. And the investment that has to go into the infrastructure is just as critical as the hardware and just as critical as the software games like Fortnite. Right? Oftentimes we think about the game experience. The game experience would not exist without the connectivity that's happening underneath that. And then we're going to go into 3D spatial computing. Who's familiar with 3D spatial computing? Okay, there you go. IT, you should be familiar with that. It's augmented reality and virtual reality. The ability to immerse yourself now in the game and be seen as if you're actively playing in that experience is going to change your life forever. We will look at gaming today, 10 years from now, and it's going to be radically different. As more hardware and hardware prices come down, it's going to become much more accessible to everybody, right? So the introduction of what Apple has done and other hardware manufacturers, the introduction of augmented reality, the gaming experience will change forever. And as technology has begun to accelerate at an accelerated rate, you got to think about the overall impact. Yes, we like to look at numbers, and I'm not going to go into it. It's bringing the world together in terms of the overall community, right? You have many, many players, both on the mobile gaming as well as esports. The economics are there. You have the industry about $217 billion. The esports specifically in terms of the competitions around $1.6 billion. The countries that are top three are China, US, and Japan. And hopefully with the investment here in Portugal, we'll see Portugal become one of the top 5. I'm committed to helping you guys. But none of this matters without when you talk about ethics, and this is why I'm so honored to be part of Sports Integrity Global Alliance. We can create the most amazing technology. We can create the most gaming experiences. But what about in the process that we create all this, we actually harm society? And so in this, I challenge all of us to think about what is still happening. And as Pombal creates, I would say, I hope, the first leading way in which esports should be conducted, why should a woman and a male get priced differently? There's no difference, right? Why should we not put into consideration digital addiction? Just like betting is an addiction, digital addiction, we've seen enough how it harms us and how it affects overall mental health. There has been enough stats. As a woman, and I have played games, and being actively involved in supporting the esports industry, what I've seen of how females get bullied online is unacceptable. Why should they be bullied and why should they be threatened in the scenarios in which some really well-known esport women athletes have to have bodyguards? That shouldn't happen, and we should not allow that to happen. And finally, the thing about that happens with technology, every 0 and 1 can be connected to that every one person that's in here. So what is the right thing to do with data, and what is the right thing to do with privacy? And so while esports is a sport and a game that we all love to play, some for a few and some for many more hours, what I have to challenge Pombal, Portugal, SIGA, and the broader esports industry is to think about how do we co-create a better esports world so that we actually thrive and not hurt our society. So with that, I'll pass it on to you.
Wow, what a last question, but what a great presentation overall. Thank you very much, Sandra. I'm just see if there's the connections with our guests around the world. If it's possible, let's wait just a little bit. In the meanwhile, I'll probably get back to you on 1 or 2 comments, but we'll see if meanwhile. Ok, mas consigo ver ali? Is it possible to look at them on the screen so we can know and hear them on intervention? Meanwhile, let's while we deal with the tech.
Yes, I can hear you.
Perspective of a sports club directly, but since it's Women's Wednesday, let's take the advantage of having Max here and pass on to Max Byrne again, if possible, to talk to her. Okay. Glad to have you here. Did you listen to it was possible to follow the intervention of Sandra?
I did, and it's very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Tsubasa also. Hello, Tsubasa from.
Hello.
Okay, perfect. Well, are you listening to us? And we are listening to you. Great. So now we're really on a worldwide event, really going on. Great. I will. Nuno has already presented and we have on the billboard the names of the people and the functions of each one. I will pass on directly to Max to a little bit on what Sandra said. Max has founded a company that looks at the educational part of esports. Coming from football, from soccer, if you'd like. But please, can you help us understand what moved you through at one point to found that company and to enter in esports on that educational part?
Yes, no problem at all.
Thank you.
Firstly, I am delighted to be here, and even more so on Women's Wednesday. So a shout out to all of the women. But yeah, I found it Esports. I thought there was a huge gap in the market in terms of education and combining both education and esports, because I found it up in 2017 and I thought there was not a lot of regulation, there was not a lot of strategy, but at that time there also was not a lot of education. And so really there's two aspects to esports. Firstly, it's using esports as a tool, as an educator tool, and the secondly is then to gain formal esports qualification. And what I mean by the first aspect is, so for example, using the game to teach soft skills in school, for school bodies, for universities, for every third level education to fully embrace esports. So for example, learn soft skills such as team management, leadership skills, communication skills, use all of the skills that a student can learn through gaming and bring it into the classroom. The second aspect that we've just recently developed upon is gaining formal education. So our company, we're very proud and privileged to be offering a form of BTEC in esports, which in the UK is equivalent of GCSE or A-level. So formal qualification that can be used to gain entry into university. And with that, touching on a lot of what was said before, certain aspects like ethics, like the business of esports. I'm a lawyer and I'm fascinated by the law that's surrounding esports. So all of these different aspects are brought in. I'm intrigued as well, delighted to see Sports Integrity Global Alliance as a part of this as well and embracing it, because there is work to do, but I feel like it's in a much better space than it was in 2017 when I formed eStars. That's just a little overview.
Well, fantastic. You touched one or two points there, very, very keen to me also. Let me just still have you here and to pass on to Reinaldo and then after to Tsubasa. You have been working not only, correct me if I'm wrong, not only in Fortnite, but you have experienced the connection between esports and the football clubs, traditional classical sports clubs. I would love to hear your experience regarding that needs that you've shown and that you've told us now. What has been the sensibility of sports managers, of club managers regarding esports? Are they afraid? Are they looking only for the profit part, or do they bring on esports to the idea of all the values that traditional sports have or should have, ethics, morally, rulings? What has been your experience, please?
Everything. So we held an event called eStars featuring Fortnite, and we toured stadiums in the UK and Ireland. For example, we went to Stamford Bridge in Chelsea, we went to Celtic Park, we went to Manchester City, we toured over top clubs. And the clubs were very curious. They know they need to do something, they want to embrace this. The other thing as well, from a business perspective for our club, the club also want to embrace a new audience. That is the target market, the 12 to 30-year-old average gaming age. They want to embrace that. They had an opportunity to invite gamers into their stadium, use the stadium space, hold an event and totally embrace it. So there's a little bit of everything. There's curiosity, there's a need to be involved. It's great to see the football clubs in England, the majority of them now have their own esports team. I still think there's a bit of work to go, but they're certainly embracing it. They know it's the future. They know it's where they need to be in terms of target audience. But generally, it's very much a curiosity, shall I say, but very keen to also embrace.
Okay, thank you. I will just want to say to all our guests that at the end of this little roundup on questions to everyone, if you want to, between yourselves, place questions for curiosity or something else, please let me know or take the microphone to ask also between the guests themselves. We have here a vice president of Portuguese classical traditional sports club. It's perfect now that Max approached the relationship between esports and sports clubs to understand why here in Portugal and how did a club like Boa Vista Football Club start the relationship with esports about 6 years ago, roundedly, and what has been the experience inside a classical sports club relating to gaming esports, competitive gaming.
Thanks for the question. Good afternoon, everyone. It's quite interesting for me to share the experience of Boa Vista FC with you guys. It was, to be honest, an answer to the public. So there was demand, and we needed to have supply. So we knew everyone was gaming, like 50% of you are actually gamers. You do play some time of your time. So in terms of entertainment, that there is a huge number of people playing in every type of games. And we had some people contacting the club saying, what is Boa Vista doing about gaming and esports? So if you want gaming, either for entertainment or competitive purposes. And so we had to have an answer. And at that time, I was at the club for a few months only, and I just decided that the president had to make a decision. So to be very honest, I said to the president, you have to decide if you want to satisfy this demand or not. So it has to be a strategic decision. And I remember all of the points that I showed him in a very short email and in a very short meeting, where I said, we have a century-old club. Actually, Boa Vista did 120 years this year. So it's 120 years old club. Esports is only 6 years old. Esports in Boa Vista has to be a sport, not an activity. So we are a sports club. We are not an entertainment company. So if esports are actually sports, we have to make it sports, not entertainment. So in that sense, I wanted to be one of the 30 plus sports the club have. So of course, it's Boa Vista FC, so the F is for football, right? That happened 110 years ago when they decided to have this name for the club, but it's actually Boa Vista Sports Club. We have 34 sports, if I'm not wrong, today, from football to every type of fight and gymnastics and handball and volleyball and so on. And we have also esports, which is a sport, right? So the decision was, this is going to be a sport, and we are going to try to satisfy the demand. So some people were asking us, what should we do? What will the club do? And we said, well, we are actually doing it for 120 years. It's written in the statutes. So we are here to provide means for people to practice sports. So there is this thing called technology, which actually brought the opportunity of building stadiums and pavilions and whatever tournament venues we have in gaming. And why don't we take this opportunity and make it something real for inclusiveness and for every interest that our members and our fans would have. So at that moment, we went to look what were the popular games and so on. And of course, we had FIFA. So we had this virtual football experience, which was obvious because most of the fans of sports in Portugal are actually football fans, so it's kind of natural that we have, let's call it virtual football. And eventually, it may be that some of the people know Boa Vista today, and this was only 6 years ago, let me rephrase it again. So in 6 years, we came up to be a reference in terms of the esports competition in the country. And that was not because we won a national cup of FIFA back 2 years ago. It was mainly because one of the first things that we did in the club was to create an esports athlete handbook. So it's actually a piece of paper, but it's a piece of paper that we invoke a lot of times. So we say, like it is in the handbook, it's like this. So the handbook says specifically that you should have fun. So this is entertainment becoming competitive. This is not war. This is not struggle. Yes, I know that sports originally have their roots in the war, in the dispute, in the competitiveness of the human being, etc. But today, sports is much more than that. It's a really inclusive, I would say, educational activity, which is excellent in so many ways, and many experienced people have said it before today. Great interventions, by the way. And so we said, first and foremost, we have to create this handbook to say what exactly we think it's an esports athlete. And by the way, nobody actually wrote the handbook. Well, to be honest, I wrote a couple of pages. And then I kicked it off and I said to every team manager, to every athlete, so to every gamer, why don't you make a better paragraph out of this? So pick a bit of the handbook and say, what is the better way to write this bit? So what exactly do you expect of your fellow athletes, of your team manager, of your coach? So what exactly are we expecting of these sports? And most of the time, yeah, it's true, I agree, when we say we think esports is very recent. Well, but let me tell you, I have like 30 plus sports directors in the club. So I can go with the, well, to be honest, if you, and by the way, you are invited to come by and have a look at our venue. So yes, esports are played online, but we do have, I would call it a gymnasium. We actually call it esports arena, but it's because it's fancy. It's some place where we have some consoles and PCs and where we sit together to play esports. Because I cannot create a team with people that I see in little squares. The little squares that we have here today to have a global event is amazing. I mean, it's amazing. We are so lucky to live in these days. But that's not enough. I need to have people with me. I need to understand how these guys communicate. Those who played sports know what I'm talking about when I say there is this look that the trainer gave me. Look, but he looks at you and he understands. Is it telepathy? Is it technology? No, it's training. It's understanding how a team works. And that happens in sports, that happens in schools, that happens in businesses. And so I think the responsibility that a club should have to introduce esports. And I'm quite okay with some of the clubs don't have it already because they probably don't have the means or the purpose or the right motivation to do it. But I think more and more clubs will come to that. And now, fast forward, and I will end quickly. We are seeing today that there is a thin line between virtual and real. So I'm not going to talk metaverse. I'm going to talk the actual cyborgs that we are today. I just said that I use these words to provoke everyone. We are all cyborgs today because we have this amazing extension of ourselves that keeps us connected and let me communicate with everyone in the world anytime. I just got a digital handshake from Tsubasa, which is online, which I don't know personally. And this is happening every day, and I think this is amazing, right? Now, the question is, are you guys using this with a purpose, with some kind of values, or you are just using it because you basically, and let me be, again, provocative, sheep, like, you know, in the fields, going for the grass, or cows, or whatever animals you think of. No, we are human, and that's the big thing that distinguishes from everything else. And I think that's the part that the club can bring to allow humans to interact in a positive, constructive, inclusive way. And basically, we have to train this and we have to practice this. If you surrender to technology, we'll become like pieces of a machine.
Picking up, well, you ended very well.
You spoke to
No. But at this on the human part, because Tsubasa did give you a digital handshake, and he's the human rights officer of the Swiss Esports Federation. I hope that we can see him and hear him so that we are talking about and also Sandra talked about the women's rights and defending equity on esports and a balance between male and female. And I would like to share with you all and with our audience how does a national esports federation or association, if called, can we have Tsubasa? Are you listening to us? Okay, just a few more. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Hi. Virtually handshake.
I talked to him a little bit. We've seen very different perspectives until now of a company like eStars, a more global and industry perspective of Sandra, a sports club perspective, and on this frame, we are missing something. Somebody talked already about rules about esports and all of this that is happening. There's something missing then that's why we have Tsubasa. We also had Khalid Nahili from Morocco, and I'm very sad that he just sent me a message regarding a technical issue on their part, unfortunately. He started with us this conference, but he went down and is trying to solve it, because he would be talking about a state, a nation, a government, like the Moroccan royal government, looking at the recognition of esport as a sport, to better deal with one of the aspects of esports, that is betting on esports and on sports in general, and in that aspect. But we have here a representative of a national federation. Exactly what is a national federation in esports? Tsubasa, please help us. And what's exactly your function, which is very interesting to hear about, probably because it's in Switzerland, I don't know, let's see, human rights officer.
Okay, thank you so much for having me and inviting me in these sessions. I'm really honored to be here. And then, yeah, I will explain a little bit on my function in the federation. So national federation in Switzerland, that is like, we cannot consider like the sports governing body in a traditional sports. So we need to separate from the understanding of the traditional sports in the governing body, because we cannot control all of the esports stakeholders. So that's why we have to be really neutral. We have to pay attention to all of the stakeholders. If not, they don't want to join us. So that is the first thing, the most important difference between the esports federation and sports governing body. At the international level, probably it's going to be changed, but at the national level, it's going to be really tough to say and create some legislation. So not legislation, it's a self-regulation. So for my job in the federation, that is human rights officer, is that we try to create some safeguarding system in the esports society only in Switzerland, because my role in the Switzerland only. So I try to develop, because at first there's so much oppositions to create such a position, because the human rights is directly connected with the activist some perspective. So that's why I tried to persuade, and then finally I got it, and then I already create some of the project in order to develop safeguarding in CC Sports Federation. So that is really nice. That is my function. And then at the same time, I also try to collaborate with the educational function in order to develop how can I say, promote the human rights or some understanding of gender equality or diversity and an inclusion, for instance, within the esports community in Switzerland. So that is the brief overview of my function in Swiss Esports Federation. And then, yeah, is the most important thing is that, as Louis already mentioned that, yeah, we have a little bit discussion about the esports, whether the question is whether esports is sports or not, but unfortunately, Switzerland does not recognize esports as sports. That is the culture aspect. So that's why we cannot say the sport at this moment. And then, so it's really political issue. So that's why, from my perspective, it's not federation perspective. We should avoid have the discussion about this concerning the sport, esports or sports. But I just consider esports already exist. So that's why we try to develop and promote such activities, especially in Switzerland, from my perspective. So yeah, that is the short answer to your questions. Thank you.
Second roundup and probably last roundup on questions and answers around our guests. Let me pick up on what you said. So just to be clear, in a nation like Switzerland, there is a national entity trying to organize a little bit the sports scene, or a little bit, or as much as you can, but you don't have at the moment any mandatory power, effective power to esports clubs that arise or esports teams that operate in the nation. Is that it? It's more voluntary on that part, on their parts to connect with you guys. Did he disconnect? No. Oh no, just a moment. Wait, okay. We lost the sound. Just a minute or less. Try. Yes.
Is it okay?
Okay, yes. But did you hear my...
So, yeah, I can hear now. So yes, because of the internet connection problem. So for us, we try to be the regulatory body as well. But we also have to pay attention to consider each entity's autonomy, because they don't want to be governed by one entity like esports publishers. So that's why we try to launch the project of the esports map Switzerland. We try to know what kind of the entities exist in Swiss territory, and then we try to identify what we can do it. So that is also part of my human rights project. So we try to launch, and then I already tried to do the survey, but we cannot do a lot of things because of this complicated situation. So that's why I cannot exactly say we are the governing body. We can create some of the regulation, but we try to slowly take the step to persuade our members to follow our rules or purpose, and also our how can I say, our future goal to govern esports society in Switzerland. Is that okay for you?
Oh, yes, it's okay. I will ask a question to Max afterwards, so please, Daniel, if you can then put her up. But meanwhile, and regarding this, I'll go back to Sandra, if it's possible, because this question of, okay, for instance, WESCO, which I represent for Europe, we are a worldwide consortium for esports, because precisely the idea of before existing a governing body like in sports for a sports discipline, we need, in specificity of competitive gaming esports regarding the publishers and the manufacturers, and we need a different approach to bring everybody together. But the question is, and we are now on the verge of the third decade of the millennium in 2023, and we still don't have and don't see in a short term a global entity that can enforce necessary regulations. For instance, how do we improve the male-female equity and balance and the presence of women more in competitions? Could be other questions, but I'm picking on this up because it's one of the most important, if not the most, but I don't see in a short term the possibility of things getting really better without, in some countries, some people voluntarily go for it, in others don't. Some companies don't care. Some tournament organizers don't mind about that. How do you see it on a global scale? Because SIGA could be, of course, one of the boosts for that, regarding many governments and many nations and all the continents.
It goes back to the question, is esports a sport? And if it's a sport, then there should be frameworks in place and standards in which, at least in a country, you begin to align, and then eventually you can take it international. And until then, and then everybody has their own incentives in terms of capitalism and how people make their money. And so when I look at, and I'm looking at it from the evolution of technology, when technology, which is esports, is the underpinning, came from tech, the process of deriving standards is really hard. And there has to be a catalyst and or motivation so that the entire ecosystem, which oftentimes we're competitors, right? So those that are creating software games also compete with each other. And you think about leagues, and so is there a desire to work with each other? And so unless it's coming, I would say sometimes change happens with the players and those that are the viewerships to drive that fundamental change and asking that we should have a standard framework processed and run it like a sports. Until then, will we see change? There are, and I've actually interviewed a lot of, athletes that play esports. They don't want to be regulated like, global football and or American football. And so
who wants to be regulated?
Nobody
wants to be regulated.
But this is how you're going to drive change in terms of driving equality, right? So how do you create equality? And sometimes you need to put some regulations in place. And so while I know we talked about like how long has esports been around, it's been around many, many years. I do think it's been seen more as entertainment with technology, and I think we need to go back to a very basic question. Is esports a sport? If so, what does that look like? And for those that are interested, I think this is where SIGA has a play. Like, how do you bring at least, it takes a small group to drive change, right? So there's this whole notion of the tipping point, the crossing of the chasm. When you get to, I believe the number is over, like once you get to 20%, change happens. So who's that 20% that you're going to begin to work with that you can actually drive a global framework and drive change?
We very agree on that point, and I don't know how many of you and how the attendants know, but recently in Africa, WESCO was a part of, precisely drove by the Moroccan government. Right. There was a constitution of a continental association with dozens of national federations in Africa towards the preparation and the creating a regulatory frame, a legal frame to recognize in many countries as possible esports as sport, precisely as the first stage, so that they can all go together and the governments also look at it. We can't say or hope for the exactly same way, but in the similar ways, in close way, or intervene through the youth part, or intervene through the economic part, or as the sport part. Can we put Max on the Max Byrne on the, please? Because, and then I'll go back to Reinaldo. And then afterwards, if you want to speak or to comment on each other, please do. Max, just to on this topic, since at the same point, I view you as, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as on the enterprise part and the company part, on the industry, but at the same moment with a very educational purpose and worrying about that. how do you see this question globally? I know that you also operate not only in Europe, but in Asia, in the Middle East, and how do you see this perspective in a short term, if possible, of creating really enforceable standards in esport in all these aspects that we've talked about?
Yeah, going to what Sandra said, esports. I think esports is a sport and it's also a business. And both sports and business need regulation. They need entities, need governing bodies to make sure it's done properly. There's so much, there's billions of pounds in the industry at the moment, and it needs to be formally regulated. I mean, again, I formed eStars in 2017, and there was nothing. There was no forums, no entities getting involved, nobody wanting to do what it is today. So there are lots of progress being made, but I think I make a lot of parallels with football, with the football ecosystem, with our FIFA, with UEFA, with governing bodies. And I think that's what will happen with the esports industry as a whole, where there's regulation, where things are done properly. It prevents cheating. It makes sure there's an equity and a fairness for everybody within the ecosystem. And I think, but the strides that are made through individuals like yourself, even, through what we're doing, it's huge, and it's only going to become much better.
inside Europe, the nations are at with different looks through esports, at different speeds, the governments regarding esports. So it will be almost impossible in a short term to get together. Of course, the European Commission started, of course, it's better than 5 years ago, but still it seems a little bit too slow. But I'm probably in a rush, so it's my problem. Any comments regarding, if in the audience anyone can place a question, please do, before we close up in 5-10 minutes tops. Max or Tsubasa, please tell me if you want to do any curiosity question, any final comment, any last statement. I saw you, Sandra, taking some notes. Any specific?
First of all, I'll take a lot of notes. It's interesting listening to intelligent people around the game of esports, so it's my learning process as well. Ronaldo just said he saw some young future leaders in the room, and I would say there's no esports without the players, and there's no esports without the viewers. And I often believe that sometimes change happens with these future leaders that I see in the room and probably listening online. And so I would just challenge you to be vocal and help inform the playbook that Ronaldo, you mentioned that you created. It's a framework. The great thing about esports is right now there's just no foundation. So you have the opportunity to drive change and drive change for the better. And I'm so excited about millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and what you guys are capable of doing. And so I will just challenge, esports is often played between 18 to 34. Be the change that the world needs to see. You have the opportunity to create the framework. And we're here, along with SIGA, to support you. They have the Youth Advisory Council as well, to help, at least in the United States, start to create some frameworks if we are going to see esports as a sports.
Okay, Katie. Let's do it. Very sorry to him. Daniel, can you put the two on the so that
to every word that you said, and just to say that and I think it was Mary that mentioned that esports is a sport and it's a business, and that both of those need standards. The sports world is behind the business world when it comes to standards. That's why we have the SIGA Universal Standards on Sport Integrity, and we're encouraging those pioneers to go through our independent rating and verification system. And the system works. It's a kite mark of excellence. Would you go into a restaurant without knowing what star it is? Would you go on a plane not knowing that it met the aviation standards? And increasingly, the fans, who are, as you know, now becoming increasingly conscientious about causes. So I would say that, picking up on what Sandra said, that esports, it can be in a unique position because, although it's got a much longer history than I actually realised, Sandra, so thank you for that, but it can learn from a lot of the governance mistakes from traditional sports. And that's what makes it a really unique proposition. And I think that the fans are also very unique and different. And I think that picking up on the leadership piece, those two could catapult it into having a leading role. And actually, the traditional sports will be increasingly jealous, or, as you know, come on board with esports, because where there's good ethics and good business and good governance, it all should translate to revenue. So I just wanted to make that point. And thanks, sorry, it wasn't Mary, it was Mags. Sorry, I can't read the screen, Mags. But happy WOW Day. I will be following up with you to invite you to be a global mentor for the SIGA Women Mentorship Program. Sandra's one as well. But just congratulations, and I just wanted to make that point on the governance. And yes, we would love to adapt the universal standards and invite one of the first esports to go through SERVs as a pioneer. This week, Sao Paulo FC, first football club. Last week, Liga Portugal, first European and football league to go through it. So we're in a week of firsts, so why not esports? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Max or Tsubasa, let's ask Max first, she was mentioned now. Please, any final comment, question, remark regarding all that was said?
Yeah, I think like Sandra said, it's great to always learn. We also always learn, share best experiences, and the more events like this, the quicker we'll get to regulation, the quicker we'll get to equality, the quicker we'll get, without losing the fact that, again, as Sandra quite rightly said, without the players, without the viewers, there are no esports. So I think it's just a matter of being cohesive and pulling everything together. And again, delighted to be involved in more of these sessions as well, to really pull everyone's best knowledge and all educate each other.
Thanks. And Tsubasa, please, any also?
So just for the final comments, yeah, at first, yeah, today is the representative of the Swiss Esports Federation. So that's why my, the freedom of expression is a little bit limited. So that's why then I want to say something from my perspective as a legal researcher. So if you want to know my opinions, you can also find some of the pieces of the articles on the website. So that's why, yeah, it's much better to understand my personal opinion. And then, yeah, it's really pleasure to share the national federation's perspective, which is really difficult situation to regulate our own country as well. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you all for your time. Thank you all for your interventions, for your presence. Many thanks to SIGA to put this all together with WESCO on my personal behalf and with the thanks of the World Esports Consortium also, and of course to the city mayor and to the city itself of Pombal, the technical team, the support team that brought us all here together and on the screen also, and hope to see you again all here, and in the end the audience all wherever we can meet again, but here in Pombal probably next year or very soon regarding this topic and more development on this. Thank you very much and stay safe and well, and see you another time. Thank you.